Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Paula Price. I'm a lawyer turned executive coach, and I'm delighted to be speaking with all of you today and welcoming our guests to talk about how to prepare for your in-firm interviews. Now, before we introduce our guests, we have Kimberley Ho, who is the National Director recruiting at Borden Ladner Gervais. And we also have Andrea Rayment, the Director of Professional Development at Clark Wilson. And I'll be introducing them more formally in just a moment. They're going to be answering all of your questions, which is just amazing. Just a few things to cover first. First, I would like to acknowledge that the land from which I'm joining you is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I would invite everyone who is joining us to think about where it is that they are joining us from today. And I'm delighted to be welcoming guests from across Canada. I had a chance to peek at the guest list before today's webinar started. We have a number of registrants from all the way from Dalhousie to UVic and everybody in between. So a big thank you to all of you who have joined us here today to learn more about the in-firm interview process. It really is a pleasure to be having you here. We'd also like to thank all the career services offices at the law schools across Canada for helping us share news of today's webinar. We are very grateful for the relationships that we have and the ability to bring this type of programming to you to help you navigate this process. And of course, I would love to thank our speakers. Again, I will introduce them in just a moment, but they are amazing. And I think everyone who has joined us here today will be delighted to learn from them. We have 60 minutes together. We're going to wrap up our webinar right before or right at the hour. Our guests have meetings to run to, so we want to be respectful of their time, and of course we want to be respectful of your time. We are going to have about 45 minutes of Q&A. So these are questions that Andrea, Kim, and I all talked about before today's session. And we're also going to have time for live questions. So for all of you who are joining, there is the Q&A function, and you're welcome to put questions into the Q&A. And if you have questions that you would like to be put to the speakers, please put them there. There's an upvoting function available. So if you see a question that somebody else has posed that you like, if you hit the thumbs up button, that question will go to the top of the list. We're going to be starting with the most popular questions first. If what you would like to do is comment on what is going on during the webinar, you're also welcome to do that. I don't know that I'll be able to keep an eye on the chat function, so I would encourage any questions that you want asked to go to the Q&A. We're going to be talking about 3 different topics today. We're going to start out with the process. So that really is looking at the role of in-firm interviews in the broader context of law firm recruitment. We're going to be talking about how to prepare, so the kind of questions that you might be asking of yourself and of firms to help you find a good fit. And then finally, we're going to be talking about interviews and offers. So that's really getting to more of the practical aspects of navigating the recruitment process. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my slides. And now you will all be able to see our guests. They are wonderful. I'll introduce each of them, starting with Kim Ho. So Kim is, as I mentioned, she is the National Director of Professional Recruiting at Borden Ladner Gervais, and she is based out of their Calgary office. She has been responsible for student recruitment and student programs in the Calgary office since 2015. So Kim has a wealth of experience, and it is always such a treat to have her. This is the 3rd time that Kim and Andrea and I are doing this webinar. We started doing it at the beginning of the pandemic, or I guess it was the first recruit season in the pandemic. And every time we meet, I learn something new from them, and it is such a pleasure having them. So Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, it's my privilege and honor. Thank you, Paula, for the invitation.
Thank you so much. And I'd also like to introduce Andrea Rayment. And Andrea is the Director of Professional Development at Clark Wilson in Vancouver, BC. Andrea has over 15 years of experience supporting lawyers and students, both in the capacity of working in-house, which is what she's currently doing, and also previously she did this work as an external coach. And again, Andrea is such a wealth of knowledge. She brings with her so much experience. She has great practical insights. And I think she's really great at helping us see the perspective, both from the perspective of the firm and from the perspective of the student who's interviewing. And I see Kim nodding her head in agreement. So welcome, Andrea. It is a pleasure to have you back as well.
Thanks, Paula. It's so exciting to be introduced always, you know? You kind of sit there thinking, there's nothing nicer than being introduced. You always sound fabulous when you're introduced.
Well, and it's not just when you're being introduced. You are both fabulous all of the time. So thank you again for being here today. So I'm going to jump in with our first question, again, talking about the process. And Kim, if you can start us off here, what are in-firm interviews and where do they fit into the recruitment process?
So generally there's, depending on the market, what the in-firm interview period means. For a center like Toronto, it's a very set period. It's, 4 days. The dates are set. In Calgary, for example, the in-firm interview period is sort of the second interview period. That's what the in-firm interview period is all about. You've gone through your OCIs. You've been invited back by the firms to come and meet the firm in firm. And what that means is just really a second interview. Depending on the market, it's either in person or virtual. And it's then another opportunity for you to get to know the firm and the firms to get to know you. And again, it's a formal process. In Calgary, it is very long. It's a 2-week process. It starts October 3rd. It's not done until October 14th, as opposed to Toronto, where it starts November 7th and it's done by November 9th. So it's a very finite period. And Vancouver would run similar to the Toronto process, but in October. Andrea, you've got some insight on those dates in October. Yeah.
Yes, and now I'm embarrassed to I got to flip through late October. It's always in like the week before Halloween.
Yeah.
All good. And Andrew, do you have anything to add in terms of the in-firm interview process and what role it plays in terms of recruitment?
Well, me being me, I'd love this point could kind of be a half-hour philosophical discussion with Kim. It's like, in a funny way, I was thinking, I actually think of in-firms as the first interview. I try to, if I was talking to students and sort of like, calming their shoulders and saying, okay, here we go. Kim's right. Like Toronto, we do it. It's basically 3 days. It's 3 days of interviews, and then offers are made on the 4th day. So I really think of that process, of that Monday morning, it's the first interview. So there's been all this swirl of stuff, and there's been OCIs, and there's been networking, and there's, but then there's a point where, it's just time to take a deep breath and get to know each other almost afresh, because the people you meet on that first day, you probably won't have met before. I don't know. But yeah, it's where the rubber hits the road.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you, Kim. And the whole in-firm interview concept, of course, was coined pre-pandemic, when in-firm literally meant that all the students would be in the firm, most of them, I think, for the first time. And so now we are 2.5 years in, I guess, to the pandemic. In previous years, everything has been done, well, previous pandemic years, it's been done virtually. I know we would all love to know what the process is going to look like this year. And Andrea, maybe you can start us out by letting us know what things are going to look like in Vancouver, and then Kim will turn to you to ask about what things look like in Calgary and Toronto.
As far as I know, in Vancouver, there may be some official edict that comes down through the Vancouver Bar Association process or their working group. But what I know from all my colleagues around town is that most people, I think, except for the government employers, are going to be having in-person interviews, with the very important stipulation that if somebody would like to do their interview virtually, they can. So that's what we're expecting. We're expecting it to be in person. It's what we're really keen to do. And from what we've heard from the BC schools, at least, that's what most students are keen to do. So that's what we're expecting. But if anyone can't do in person, that's fine. They can do it virtually.
Beautiful. And just a little throwback. I mean, now that we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about how if you've been doing this in a pandemic environment and infirm is a foreign concept, I think even just a refresher on what the infirm process looks like. When I went through many years ago, it was meeting lawyers, it was going for firm tours, it was having a chance to meet other students. I mean, is that still what you're expecting to have then this year for the infirm, like for those students who are literally in person at the firm?
Absolutely. So, every firm schedules differently, just so people know. I mean, it's not like there's a set time for interviews like there is with OCI. So you as a student, as you get requests for interviews, let's all touch wood, you get tons of them, that you need to manage that schedule yourself. So somebody could ask you for 9, somebody could ask you for 9:30, and you're managing all that and building in whatever breaks you need. Yeah. So, and part of why we've been keen for everyone to take the same approach, every firm to take the same approach, is so that as a student, you are either downtown in your suit running around between firms, or you're at home or somewhere else in your fabulous Zoom room meeting with firms back to back, but you're not trying to do both, because that's quite tricky, I think. Yeah.
Beautiful. And I think that's a really great point you made about keeping your schedule managed with the expectation that the interview itself may not be 30 minutes, or it may be a 30-minute interview followed by possibly another interview or a firm tour. So you want to be spacing your interviews apart enough that you've given yourself time.
So you can run down the street, for the next one.
Beautiful. Kim, what about you and how things are going to look in Calgary and in Toronto for the infirm portion of the recruitment?
I'll address Toronto really quickly, only because they don't have that absolutely 100% determined yet. And so I would encourage students to stay in contact with your career offices as the employers are trying to determine what the best course of action is now. And they know that they're getting down to it, because with the infirm period being in November, it's coming up quickly, and students need to plan. They need to plan if they're going to actually travel or not travel, or if it's all going to be virtual. So hopefully those answers will become clear very soon. And I confirmed with our Toronto office just this morning to make sure that I had my messaging right for all of you. As for Calgary, most of the employers have agreed, with the exception of, again, the government employers. We've all agreed that we would prefer to have an infirm, in-person process. So I would say, but with that said, though, a lot of the employers, again, are being very flexible in that we will accommodate any student who would like to interview with us virtually. We've been through this for 2 years now. Employers know that we've successfully hired students virtually. We've done it. We are now used to this process. And so will this disadvantage a student at all if you have to interview virtually versus in person? I think what I can say and reassure students is that we've done this well for 2 years now, and we will continue to do it well. Will it make a difference if you come in person? I think there's always nuances when you come and interview with a firm in person. There's body language, there's energy, there's all of that. And then you can take advantage of, if there is a firm tour, if there's other social events that you can attend. It's much harder to do that virtually. So in person will give you a better sense of the firm, the people, the culture, what they stand for. And so with that said, I think it will really help the student if you do approach the infirm period in person. But
Agreed.
that to me is the only advantage. Like I said, we've done this well virtually. And so from the infirm week, what students can expect, because the period is so long in Calgary, we have time and space, and students have time and space to be able to make decisions, meet people, really make an informed decision. From my perspective in Calgary, I always felt that this recruit was advantageous to the student, and rightly so. You've got the ability to meet people. You've got the ability to get your questions answered. If you're unsure about any particular firm, practice areas, if you need reassurance that this is the right place for you, then don't hesitate to reach out and ask for additional meetings. And the firm is also, and I know for some students, it's not necessarily entirely comfortable doing all the social events. But with that said, I would just hope students sort of be mindful of that approach. Prepare yourself for it. If you need to really make sure that you re-energize in order to go to a social event, then do that. But sometimes firms want to see you be able to have casual conversations. Are you inclusive? Do you it really is just another opportunity for firms to get to know you. Is it an important part of our recruitment process? For a lot of firms, yes, it is. And so I think the social aspect, as daunting as it may be, it doesn't need to be. Just as long as you can relax into it, and if you can be authentically you, even in those social interactions, then it's going to be the right firm for you.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Kim. And you raised such a good point, which is that for so many of us, the social interaction, that actual physical being in a room with other people, um, might feel a little bit like we're rusty, right? We're not used to it. And so being strategic in terms of how you manage your energy and the strategy that you bring with you to those types of functions, if that's something that you find challenging, that's all work that you might want to be doing as much as you can ahead of the recruitment. One of the things you mentioned, Kim, and I'm going to ask this, and by the way, all of the students who are tuning in right now who have questions, I would invite you to use the Q&A. We will turn to that at the end. A question that comes up for me, Kim, is if you're looking at a 2-week window and you're a student, maybe you're in Toronto and you want to work in Calgary, maybe can you do a portion of your in-firm as an in-person event, and then have follow-up sessions via Zoom if you're not able to spend that full 2 weeks in Calgary, for example?
Absolutely. Because we know we've got Thanksgiving right smack dab in the middle of those 2 weeks, and students could be traveling home for Thanksgiving. So they're in school and then traveling home for Thanksgiving, and then we'll be able to do in-person things either before or after that weekend. And we're going to be absolutely adaptable. I think really for students, um, just think about being a student and doing recruit, and academics always go first. And so for us, we will be flexible with any student depending on your situation. So don't put so much pressure on yourself that you have to be in Calgary for a 2-week period. We know it's expensive to travel. We know there's a lot of challenges with travel right now. And if you can only do things virtually, we will adapt.
Beautiful. And Kim, we've just had a question come in through the chat, and I'm going to ask you this question, then we'll move on to our next question, which is, I've been told it's important to keep asking firms to meet more people and indicate your interest by doing so. Is it necessary to meet absolutely as many people as possible? I know it's possible to overdo it with networking. Is it possible to do the same with meeting people at firms during in-firms?
It can be. Absolutely. And I think sometimes you can get signals from the firm too, whether or not they're wanting to set up more meetings with you. And I know from the student perspective too, and I've had students through the recruitment process where, you know, social event after social event or meeting after meeting is exhausting. And sometimes you have everything you need to make a good informed decision for yourself. And if you're at that point where you can make a good informed decision for yourself, then you can tell the firm, I have everything I need. Really love your firm. I think I've gotten all the information I need. I'm good. That does not mean or signal a lack of interest on your part. You've got everything you need. And so don't feel compelled that you have to just spend every waking moment trying to meet with firms. Be thoughtful and strategic in those asks when you're looking to meet with people.
Beautiful. I love that. Thoughtful and strategic. Thank you, Kim. And Kim, I have another question for you, which is on point before we jump to the next one, which is, if you have to pick a week to be in Calgary, whether it's the first week or the second week in person, do you have a recommendation as to which would be the better week to be there?
I guess it's we have students who are actually looking at either side of Thanksgiving. For some students, we're interviewing them virtually and then we're meeting them in person the following week. And then it's reversed for some students as well. I don't think we have necessarily a preference, but if we could possibly do the interview in person, that's always really beneficial to be able to do that. And that usually happens right at the outset, the very first part of the first week. But like I said, we've done this well for 2 years now. So please just take that pressure off of yourself and, think that you're behind the 8 ball. Trust me, students, when I tell you, firms are just as anxious about this process as you are. We're worried too that we're rusty in this whole process. We haven't really done in-person recruits in 2 years either. So we're still trying to figure out like what will resonate with students, what will be meaningful with students. Will they want to have these in-person social events? Does that mean anything to the students? So everybody should take a collective sigh and take a breath and just know that everybody's just doing their best through all of this. And when it comes time and you want to state your interests, then like feel free to do so. If you want more meetings, if you need more of that, if you are like then planning to be in Calgary after Thanksgiving, then like be strategic about those specific meetings that you want to schedule, who and when, and like you just need to be very organized through those 2 weeks.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kim. And I love that we have questions coming in through the chat. So I'm going to keep trying to integrate those. And I have just maybe a quick question. We've talked about some of the lessons that came out of the recruitment process, and is now a good time to maybe just cover that, and then we'll move into the next section, because I think some of these questions are relevant to that preparation stage. And maybe we'll start with you, Kim, and then Andrea, if you want to chime in, that would be excellent.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, just baseline for students, preparation is key. That does not mean it would be the same preparation for a virtual interview as it would be an in-person. So do your homework, do your research, ask to like learn about the firms prior to, know the differences between the firms. What we've learned through even virtual or interviews over the last 2 years is that we can do this well. I have successfully hired 2 incredible summer cohorts, and they are coming in as like really well functioning teams as articling students. And so I know that we've done this well. For students who like had to have virtual summers, are they disadvantaged? I would say yes, they are, only because they had never been able to work in firm. They'd never been able to meet some of the people. They'd never really gotten a sense of the firm and worked in our offices, that sort of thing. But through all of this, like I think where we need to be mindful as firms is really like being able to pivot, being able to be flexible and adaptable in that way. And so we've learned how to do this well. We've learned how to do even virtual social events well. So those are silver linings from all of it. Would we rather meet people in person? Of course we would, but we understand student circumstances are different.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kim. And Andrea, what about you? Have you, in terms of some of the lessons that you've picked up over the last couple of years doing the virtual as opposed to the in-person, what kind of lessons have you picked up that are being applied going forward?
Sure, that I have much to add to Kim's comments there. I mean, you know, I think the lessons we learned are the same as the ones we all learned during the pandemic as in general. Like it just forced everyone to just be a little more real, a little more adaptable. And in many ways, that was quite lovely, right? I mean, we can do anything now. And our firm has been pretty committed in the last few years to stripping away the social stuff. And so, yeah, it was quite lovely just to focus on what really mattered in those interviews. Yeah. Anyway.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And Andrea, I've got a question that came in through the Q&A specific to Vancouver. I've noticed that many Vancouver firms during OCIs took a less conversational approach to the interview, and a lot of them are asking more behavioral questions. What should we expect for in firms?
Honestly, I couldn't say firm to firm. Certainly we did that this year because we, for OCIs, just because again, we're filtering, right? We're slowly filtering, and we felt it was more fair to ask the same questions of everybody. And we're really interested in, you know, we know that behavioral type questions are the best way to get to know somebody. They're not meant to, I know that they are harder because you're basically asking someone to tell stories about themselves. And that's much more I think, interesting and telling than asking somebody to talk about the 8 bullet points they've written about their last job on their CV. Like, it's just, we know it's hard, but it's more interesting. So what can you expect in-house? The absolute truth, I'll tell you, is, you know, through OCIs and through this process so far, you've probably dealt with people who, like Kim and me and our teams, who are really immersed in student recruiting. In Firm Week, you're going to meet lots of different lawyers who may only get involved in this process during that week. It's a challenge for us because we want to make sure that they know what they're doing, but who knows what they're going to do, right? They'll have their own questions and their own ideas. And some firms, I think, are really structured. We will ask these same questions in this order, and then we will flip over and you'll meet another team who will ask another set of questions. Some firms are free form. Some firms kind of want to talk about your interests and get into your love of tennis. You kind of got to be ready for all of it, I think. Don't you agree, Kim? Like, I want to tell you, but who knows?
Yeah, who knows? And I am seeing, though, a tendency for firms to move to a more formal structure. And I think that's a smarter way to go, truth be told.
It is. Yeah. But there'll always be that lawyer who says, hey, you know, I just like to get real, and they want to, you know, you got to be ready for all of it.
Agreed. Preparation, again, is key.
Absolutely. And maybe I'll pick up on your cue, Kim, because we are talking about steps to prepare. And then there's another question I'd like to pose to Andrea. Actually, to both of you, but in terms of what are some of the steps that you'd recommend that students take to prepare? And I'm just going to pause to note there's a question that came in through the Q&A on the topic of meeting people, right? So during the in-firm process, is there kind of a right balance between asking for too many people versus not enough? On the same note, what about in the interview week, or sorry, is it just for interview week? What about the time between the OCIs and the in-firm interviews? So for Calgary, there's not much of a window left. For Vancouver, it's further out. Toronto, same thing. What are your thoughts in terms of preparation and that request to meet lawyers between now and then?
I guess it depends on the blackout dates. Because for firms, we're not necessarily allowed to reach out to students other than to schedule second interviews and any events that we might be doing. So if students are interested in meeting more people, then feel free to reach out to us and we'll make those arrangements. And I think for some students, I think it's going to be important in terms of their preparation. Learning from one of my previous summer articling students about our programs, and it will help you prepare, then don't hesitate to do that reach out. The blackout period is because firms can't reach out to students, but students can absolutely reach out to the firms to gain more information.
I've got my response to that, I'm probably being too honest. You know, there's some students who we're just doing OCIs now. I think we've got TRU left. And, you know, there's some students who networked in the traditional way all summer long. You know, they met all the firms and they went to all the tours and they met with an articling student, and, you know, they've sort of they did their work up front, and now they've done their OCI. And for most of those people, I'd say just relax now, like you're done. And hopefully you get the call and you're going to come for an in-firm. But there were some people who didn't, and maybe they didn't have time, or maybe they weren't sure they were going to do the big firm recruit or whatever. And for those people, now that you've met when you meet firms at OCI, you have that window. Like in Vancouver, we've got a week left. I think it's perfectly okay. Just, you know, you're catching up, let's be honest. And if you want to make sure that you've got to know a firm a bit, I think it would be okay to ask to meet somebody now. But don't do it. I wouldn't do it don't do it unless you need to do it. And if you haven't really met any firms until OCIs, maybe you need to do it a little bit just to give yourself more of a sense of the firm. Yeah.
Beautiful. And I love that we're talking about how you can prepare for the process. One of the things that we've talked about meeting people, we've talked about anticipating the kind of questions that you might be asked. We talked about behavioral questions versus some of the less structured questions, and that you really want to prepare for any type of question that can come your way. What do you recommend? And maybe Andrea, we'll start with you for this one. What kind of questions would you recommend that students ask during an interview?
You know what? I think students should ask the same kinds of questions that we're asking them. I mean, you're going to get interesting answers from a firm, and I think telling answers from people at a firm, if you ask them to tell stories. So the questions there, tell me about your firm culture is, and tell me about the work-life balance that you offer, or probably the question we get asked the most, and it's just everyone's, I'm sure students have their own list of questions they're tired of answering. The question would be, why are you at your firm? And what brought you to the firm? These are pretty stock standard questions, and they're really boring to answer 50 times. So, but questions that or even questions like, well, I was reviewing your bio on the website and I noticed that you practice these areas of law, and that's not very interesting. You wouldn't be interested if somebody said that of you. So the good questions would be ones like, give me an example of a project that you're working on now, or give me an example of the kinds of things that students in this practice area do, or I don't know, I hope, do you know what I mean? Ask for stories. If you could, I'd be interested in a story about the most interesting story that you've had of working with a student, or a story of your first few months when you moved to Vancouver or Calgary to practice law. People are happy to talk about themselves, and they're happy to tell you stories. So invite those stories. That's what I think is the most helpful. And forgive me if I veered, Paula, but I think where people can go, you can see it, where people go wrong in preparing is over preparing. So I'm not sure what CSOs tell you, people prepare for all these behavioral questions. You've got to prepare your team story, and you got to prepare your hard work story, and you got to prepare your, and people come, and sometimes those stories are polished to such a degree that it just feels like a strange theater performance. And and so as an interviewer, what I try to do is then get people off of those prepared stories and try to get them to a real place. So I honestly think the better preparation in a way is it would be to prepare, to practice talking to somebody else in a professional way about who you are and what you do, right? So Kim and I could sit for 2 hours and practice. I could stay curious about Kim's job and her interests and her background, and what's motivating her these days, and what drives her to succeed in law. And she could do the same with me, and just practice talking about yourself is I think probably the best thing you could do, instead of practicing perfectly burnished stories. Yeah,
absolutely. And I love how you're drawing that, that balance of professionalism and also authenticity, right? To really come through as who you are, and to come across natural, and still show that you're prepared, still show that you are engaged in the process. So
it's tricky. I get it's tricky,
it's
but
a fine
it's
balance.
just,
Yeah. But I love how you've articulated that. Kim, what about you in terms of some of the questions that you would recommend that students bring to interviews?
I think for students, like, to Andrea's point, you can over prepare, but and I say this over and over again, preparation is key, but I think it's really understanding the differences between the firms. It's really understanding, who your interviewers are, really like get beyond sort of the pages of the website. Like, about BLG, about the formal rotation system, but if you wanted to ask something that goes a little bit deeper, like, you can ask something about how is work allocated in a formal rotation system. That, I think, is a tremendous question. I've gotten the gamut in terms of questions to me, right from, what has been your proudest moment at BLG to practice questions. And I think, what I've said before is, if you've taken an inventory of yourself and really thought about what's important to you, and really asked the firms questions about what's important to you, those will come, like, the good questions will come out of that. If you're worried about diversity, inclusion, mentorship, development, all those sorts of things, like, don't hesitate to ask those questions. What does that look like from BLG's standpoint? And how do you foster that kind of culture for students? Great questions.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kim. And a question just came in that is very much in connection with what we're talking about. Can you discuss further the line between being professional and authentic in terms of being appropriate, but also showing your personality? Kim, do you want to speak to that?
I think sometimes some students err on the side of being a little overly casual. Sometimes when you're in an interview, like you still need to be your best professional self. I still need to know at the end of the day that I'm going to be able to put you in a meeting with a client and you're going to be able to conduct yourself accordingly. And that means like professional language, not being overly casual, looking like you're engaged, that you're listening, there's eye contact. There's nothing worse than you checking your phone or checking, something while you're in the middle of an interview. Like, look interested, look engaged, lean forward if you have to, eye contact, get yourself grounded, keep your feet planted on the ground, like whatever you need to do to make sure that you can present yourself in the most authentic, professional way.
Beautiful. And Andrea, I see you're nodding your head. Do you have anything that you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm just mindful of, I know it's so hard because we're saying, I mean, every interviewer is you feel that magic moment when you feel like you're really talking to a real person, and you're really connecting and getting a sense of who that person is, but it's their professional self that you want to get to know. And yeah, I know it's tricky, but it is important to stay professional for sure.
Right. And I think to add to that, Paula, sometimes I think for students, like, as an interviewer, I take a lot of notes. And so don't feel discouraged if you're seeing like our heads down and writing when we're interviewing students. Like, we're actually really being thoughtful about hearing you, taking notes so that we can debrief accordingly afterwards, but we just trying to get a sense of you. And I've heard it from my students over and over again. Second interview, Kim, is terrifying. And that's because I have a job to do. I need to make sure that I'm assessing properly and I'm representing BLG very, very well through the interviews. And I want to make sure that I really give candidates an opportunity to tell their stories. And so I've got every sensory firing at that particular point. And so if I don't come across necessarily as like overly friendly, it's because I'm actually really actively listening. So for all the students, like I'm sorry, I'm terrifying, but it's one of those things where I really want to stress that we really do have an important role when we're doing these assessments.
Kim, thank you so much for saying that. Thank you, because that could be really off-putting to somebody who wasn't expecting that their interviewer might not be looking at them, that their interviewer might be taking notes. And I think especially in the Zoom era, I've got a notepad right here. I'm taking notes as we speak. I'm reading off a page and you don't see it because we're on this Zoom container. Whereas once you're in the room with somebody, there's a lot more cues, right? There's all those nonverbals. You're going to see that they've got a notepad. You're going to see what they're doing. And that might be a relatively new-ish experience just in terms of what we've been getting ourselves used to. So I think that's such a great point that will help a lot of students who are in that position where maybe they're interviewing with you or somebody who, like you, is head down, note-taking. You're really wanting to absorb all the information, and that is not a sign that something is going wrong in the interview. It is just a sign that you are doing your job and gathering all the information you need. So thank you for highlighting that. I think that's a really great point for all students who are going through this process. Kim, another question for you, which I think a lot of students will have on their mind is, okay, they're asking the questions, they're being asked the questions. What are some indicators for students that the firm they're interviewing with would be a good fit for them?
I always caution with the term fit. I think that's always one of those things that's racked with bias, and it's problematic on so many levels. But I think what students need to think about is, what I touched on previously, what's important to you. When you're starting to ask the questions about what's important to you and the firm is answering them, again, in a manner that resonates with you, it's thoughtful, that it's like the firm is actually thinking about inclusion, that the firm is actually taking steps to making sure that we've got good diverse teams, that we're actually developing our summer students and our associates appropriately. If all those things are important to you, then culturally it's going to be a good place for you to learn and grow. That, I think, for every student, that's all you want, is an opportunity and environment where you're going to be able to flourish individually and then flourish professionally. And I think those questions are going to be answered. Like, for some students, you kind of have that feeling, and I just encourage students to have an open mind about it all. When you start recruit, sometimes there's specific firms that you are targeting when you first start out, and all of a sudden, when you have an open mind and you're having these conversations and things are starting to really resonate with you, light bulbs are going off, like you have like a really good physical feeling about like all the conversations that you're having, those signals, those signs, it's the universe telling you this is going to be a good place for you.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you also for clarifying that that word fit can be quite weighted. I use it because I don't know what other word is the best substitute, but we do need to be mindful when we're using that word in terms of what we're meaning by it. Andrea, do you have anything you'd want to add in terms of how a student can know if they have landed in the right place?
I guess, yeah, I'm with Kim. That word is so problematic, but I think it's probably, I would sort of go on the other side and say, if you have any nagging doubts about a particular firm, you need to think carefully about them, because just like you, firms are putting their best foot forward and telling you the very, showing you the very best that they can. And so if you're not sure it's for you, if you don't think the pace of work or the distribution of work or the type of work or the stories that you're hearing about how people treat students or how the students connect, if that's not working for you, I think you really have to listen to it. So we talked about earlier about how many people should you try to meet over the course of the week or 2 weeks in Calgary's case. I think you keep meeting people until you finally just know, yeah, I get it. I get what this firm's like. I get the vibe of this place. And so now I can make an assessment about whether it's for me. And if until you're ready to make that real assessment, then you should probably keep investigating, because that's what you're really trying to do, is say, is this place for me, as Kim says.
I love that. To me, it really sounds like going with your gut in a sense. It's like trusting your own instinct that you've landed in the right place.
Well, it's like any important relationship, people tend to show you who they are. And so I wouldn't take on a firm hoping it's going to be different. It won't be different. It'll be exactly what it's presented as. Yeah,
absolutely. So we are moving into the next section. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Kim. And quite lovely, we have a question that is also for this next phase, which is talking about how do you handle the logistics, right, of the actual process itself. So I'm going to start with the question that we prepared, and then I'll turn to this question next. And I'll start with you, Kim. Thank you notes. This is a question that I hear quite a bit about, because people are wanting to balance, right? Do we, we don't want to bombard people with thank you notes. And at the same time, we want to acknowledge that we've just had an interview with somebody, that they've given us their time, their expertise. So what are your recommendations in terms of students sending thank you notes after the in-firm interviews?
I think it's appreciated, truly. And I don't think that anything more needs to be said. Like, the interviewers do appreciate being acknowledged for meeting with the student. I think the firm appreciates it. It just shows interest sometimes from a student's perspective. And it's always very telling in terms of when a student sends a thank you and they talk about some of the things that they heard in that interview that really resonated with them. Then you knew like some of the points that we were trying to make or what was important to them, that ended up getting highlighted sometimes in the thank you note. And then I could think about, like, if the student moves to the in-firms, like what's important to that student, and we're being very mindful of addressing it either in the in-firm interview or making sure that they're meeting people that can actually solidify those sorts of points that are important for a student. So from my perspective, I always appreciate a thank you note, and I think our interviewers do, and for some interviewers it's very important, and some interviews do take note of students who don't send a thank you note. So just err on the side of caution and just send a thank you note. I think it's always appreciated.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kim. What about you, Andrea? Do you have anything that you'd add or a different?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, I've only been doing this a few years. It's just how the system works. So it's more like if you don't send a thank you note, then the firm's it's happened to me in this OCI, so I just didn't hear from someone. I'm thinking, do they not want to, you don't know what it means when they don't. So bizarrely, you kind of have to do it. I would just say it's especially during infirm week, it's really critical. And it's really key. It's just an important part of communication, because certainly in Vancouver and Toronto, it all moves really quickly. Everyone's like, do you like me? Do you like me? Are you still in? Or what are we doing? So the thank you note is like, we met, it was great, I'm in, I'm so keen, blah, here's what I need, here's what I don't need. It's really important. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you both. I'm going to pop into the Q&A, and thank you everyone who's putting questions in the Q&A. We have about 15 minutes left, and we have a mix of questions that we prepared. And I also want to make sure that we're answering as many questions as we can that are coming in from our guests. And so put them in the Q&A, and I will try to manage both. This next question I think is really relevant, and it's kind of a two-parter. So the question came in initially: how do we handle reception events that happen at the same time? I don't want firms to think I'm not interested just because I arrive late or leave early. Then there's a follow-up. Further to the above question, if we end up in a situation where we have overlapping competing invitations for interviews or for events, what should we do? So Kim, Andrea, do you have a preference in terms of who answers this question?
No preference. I think it's a hard thing to juggle. We recognize that as firms. We know students are getting pulled in so many different directions. And I think in particular, when you're working with the Toronto recruit or the Vancouver recruit, where there's such a finite time for the recruitment period, it makes it even trickier to juggle everything. But every firm knows how hard it is for students to be able to have all these competing obligations. My word of advice for students, if hopefully receptions have a big enough window for you to be able to try and see if you can make both, if you can. If you can make one reception for an hour and then pivot and go to the next reception for the second hour, try and do that. Or if you can't make either because you've already made the obligation or the RSVP to one firm and a firm's coming in late, even though they might be sort of in the mix a little bit higher up in terms of your own personal ranking, don't hesitate to say, unfortunately, I'm committed to another event, but I'm still very interested in the firm. Is there another opportunity to meet lawyers? Be it if it's a coffee or a lunch or the dinner, that to me signals that you're still very interested in the firm, even though you've got and that to me is your professional obligation. If you're going to say that you're going to attend something, then you need to attend something. Oh, yeah. And that's nothing worse than students saying that you're going to attend something, and then they come back and send you an email saying I'm really sorry, I've got this other thing that I need to go to. And it's a real signal to the firm sometimes when you back out of an invitation to attend something else. So just be mindful of that. Or sometimes some students need to just look at their entire week or their schedule, look at all the invitations that you're receiving, and just be mindful and thoughtful of where you would like to strategically put firms in terms of your interests, how you felt after an interview, whether or not you got invited back for an in-firm, where that might fall in sort of your own ranking system. And just be mindful of the fact that it does not look great when you have to pull out of something.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. A number of questions have come in, and so I'm going to put these to you. to see how many of them we can answer. And the first choice question, we're going to get to that in a second. Right now, I'm just going to do a few of these logistical ones. And Kim, since we've got you, I might just ask you to answer these quickly. Do you need to let a firm know in advance that we're leaving early or arriving late?
That's always helpful. Like there, and I think it's just being respectful of the firm and just saying, you know, I'm excited to attend, just to let you know that I can attend from this window to this window, but I'm really looking forward to getting to know the firm better and meeting more lawyers. That's exactly how you can frame it.
Beautiful.
There's a practical issue too, right? Because sometimes the firms have got somebody down in the, you know, letting people in after hours. And so there may not be somebody there to greet you if you come 45 minutes late. Easy to arrange that, but people need to know. Yeah.
Right.
Beautiful. I'm going to ask you just a couple of notes. Maybe Andrea, I might throw these ones to you about thank you notes. And then we're going to turn to the first choice question. We've got about 10 minutes, so I'm just being mindful of covering as much as we can in the time that we have. Andrea, when we send thank you notes, should we CC recruiters and or anyone else on the note aside from the person who interviewed us?
Oh, good question. I don't know, like, yeah, I think so. I think you can be efficient, right? So if you're going to meet with 2 lawyers during infirm week, then definitely send both of them the same note. Don't drive yourself bonkers writing separate notes, and then copy me or copy, you know, in my case, Diane, or, you know, yeah, absolutely. So there's the recruiting team, and then there's the lovely lawyers you're meeting. Just be efficient. It's a great idea. Because all they're going to do is send it, all they're going to do is flick that thank you note to us to say, oh, yeah, we got a thank you note. Here you go.
Beautiful. And Andrea, while I have you talking about thank you notes, if you don't get a response from the interviewer, so do the types, timing, lack of responses to our thank you notes indicate how interested the firm is in us?
Maybe, maybe not, right? It's just like when we don't hear from you guys, it may be that somebody didn't know that thank you notes are expected, or they got swamped with the paper. So I honestly, my advice, if you're in a position where you don't know where you are with a firm and you really want to know, ask them, right? In infirm week. So you can imagine we're all running around just like you're running around. If you send a thank you note for a first interview and you haven't heard from us, then just phone. And I might say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. We're just teeing up a second interview now. Or I might say, I'm really sorry to say, we're not moving forward. We haven't had a chance to tell you. I will tell you the truth. So don't sit and wonder and wait, because there's so many moving pieces that week that never sit and wonder.
Beautiful. And that brings us to the first choice question. And I'm just going to deal with a very quick question. Is it appropriate to take notes during an interview? Kim, you were talking about taking notes. Can students do it, or is it just the interviewer?
I was going to say that they can, absolutely.
Beautiful. Yep. So we have a resounding yes. And so we're going to just knock that one off our list. And we're going to get to this question of what is the most appropriate way to let a firm know that you're your first choice in the in-firm interviews or in the thank you notes. And I'm going to couple this with the question that we prepared for, because I think it's an important one. What if you know a firm is your first choice, but you don't know where you stand with them? So Kim, I might ask you to answer this first, and then Andrea, if you can chime in, and with this additional question of how do you do it, right? When does this conversation take place?
Right. And I think it's important for students to know that no firm should be asking students where we stand. If we no student should feel any pressure to say any first choice language, period. With that said, though, is it appropriate for students to say first only if you feel like you can actually truly and confidently say that a firm is like truly your first choice? And some firms are very respectful of students through the process and will contact you and let you know whether or not, like, where you might stand, and whether or not you may be receiving an offer. Sometimes firms just don't know. Like, we're still assessing right almost up to the 11th hour. So just be patient with the firms in that respect. Does it help in our decision making if you declare first choice? Yes, it does. Sometimes it does. Have we offered to students who have not declared first choice? Yes, we have. So I just want to be mindful of that. Like, you know, the students have the opportunity to learn about the firms right up until offer time. The Calgary recruit in particular, we have like a actual blackout time period where we're not allowed to contact students at all 1 hour before offers do go out. So just be mindful of that. If you're still at the 11th hour trying to make a decision, then reach out to the firm. When is appropriate to declare first choice? When you can actually, in confidence, be able to say, you are my first choice. It does not have to be in a thank you letter or a thank you note. It does not have to be in your in-firm interview. Like, just make sure that you've got everything that you need to make a good choice for you.
I just add to that for 1 second to say, if you decide you want to make that, you want to declare your first choice, give the rose, as they say. Two straightforward tips. Be super clear. If you're going to do it, do it. You are my first choice. Don't pussyfoot around so everybody's not sure. And I would recommend doing it live, phoning and saying it directly to somebody, because then you can sort of get a sense of, I don't know, if it were me, I'd say I want to kind of hear the vibe I hear in return. But you might be deluded if you think you've heard it, but yeah.
Beautiful.
And the only other thing I'll say is, most firms are pretty direct, and I have had students give me their first choice statement, which is very helpful, because sometimes we will then say, actually, you're not on our short list, so it's wonderful and we're grateful, but you need to move on. I'm going to free you from that statement and you should move on. So communication is just always the answer. It's just always, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Andrea and Kim. We've just got a few minutes left. I'm going to turn to one question that we have prepared. Then we'll do what we can, the best to answer your questions. And thank you to all the students who've put questions in the Q&A. Andrea, following up on that idea of communication, how do you deal with a situation if you have, one firm makes you an offer, but you're hoping to get an offer from another firm? How would you recommend dealing with that?
Well, in the Vancouver's, I guess it all happens the same. You're perfectly entitled, and people do it all the time, to just say, thank you very much. I just need a bit of time. Just want to think about my options and I want to reflect on it. And then I think it's perfectly acceptable to phone up that firm that you really want and say, hey, hodly, I just got an offer, but, I just want to see what's happening with you guys first, because, you're my first choice. And it's okay to do that. And as of offer morning, that firm might say, oh, actually, we were about to phone and make you an offer. Or that firm might say, actually, if you can just hold, we've got a few things out, we may be in a position to make you an offer, just hang on. It's okay. You don't have to say yes right away, I guess is my point. If you get an offer from your second or third or fourth choice firm. Kim, you're better at this stuff.
I don't know about better, but it's one of those things where I think for students, if you don't necessarily hear from your firm, the firm that you would like to get a first, like your offer from, don't hesitate to call the firm. I've had many students do that, and find out where they are. And I can either break the news to the student directly or just say, hang on, we're just waiting for offers. And I would always, and my firm in particular did not enjoy when I told students this, but hold on, like give yourself time to get your offers and then make a decision. And then, try and be mindful of other students who may be waiting to get a call from a firm. So just be respectful of the process. And if you do know, try and get in contact with the firm as soon as you can, because there could be an opportunity for a student who's waiting to hear from the firm to receive an offer. So with that said, though, like when calls come, you can take the time to get all your offers in, evaluate, and then communicate back to the firm. So just be thoughtful through this whole process and respectful of your peers.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much. And we have about 2 minutes left. So I just wanted to acknowledge, first of all, the questions that have come in. There is a question here about internationally trained lawyers breaking into the process. Much appreciate your question, but we're going to keep the focus here on the in-firm process. And with that, I'm going to turn to our first question. And I think that's going to be the last, and by first, I mean most upvoted that will be our last question. Our speakers have appointments at 1. So with that, I will turn this over to you. How much time do you recommend scheduling between firms for in-firm interviews? Can you talk a bit about the call process as well, i.e. if I miss a call from one firm because I'm on the phone with another, what happens?
Well, hopefully the firm leaves a message for the student that you can call back the
Check
firm.
your messages. Last year, we had students who did not actually check their voicemail. I don't know what happened, or they weren't getting notifications. So check your voicemail.
Check your messages.
It was a disaster.
Yeah. No, it makes it tricky. Firms, like, if we don't reach a student immediately, we'll keep trying. So we'll try and keep calling, but do check your messages. What was the second part? Sorry.
The second part was how much time. And Andrea, speaking of time, I know you have a 1 o'clock and it is 1 o'clock. So we're going to.
I must go. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much,
Bye, Andrea.
It has been amazing. You are such a gift. And then Kim, we'll finish this question and then we will wrap up for today. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. I think you can ask the firm how much time they're going to need for the interview, and if there's tours after that. So just like, don't hesitate to ask, but you need to be mindful of travel time between firm to firm if you're doing the in-firm process, and how much, and don't hesitate to walk out the route. If you're doing in firms, walk out the route in advance of, like, the day before, even just like time, how much it's going to take. I always recommended for students, if you need to bring a pair of like walking shoes in between interviews, make sure that you do that. But again, allot yourself some time to like just sort of reset, go to the washroom, put on, change of clothes, take a deep breath, and then go back in. So build in that time that it takes to go to another firm, and then make sure that you're like in that proper mindset to get ready for your interview. So whatever that might mean for you is going to be very individual.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kim. That is very helpful, very practical. And we're going to wrap up. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we did get to 13 of the questions. So that was pretty good. And Kim, thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea, even though you've left. So much appreciate your time. And thank you to all the students who are here today, who are engaged and asking the questions. And we're so glad that we've been able to provide some information to help you navigate your way through the in-firm process. We wish you all the best throughout this process, and hope that you are able to prepare as best as you can to ask the questions that you need to ask, so that when you're going through the process, you can ultimately find what is the most, the firm that resonates the most with you. So thank you again, Kim, and
thank you.
Best of luck to everybody.
Good luck, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yeah.